in 1982, to climaxing it with being General Secretary of the Africa Regional Organization of International Trade Union Confederation, the ITUC. And this is a position he had for almost 20 years. Sorry? 16, almost 20 years. Mr. Edouard Mankwa is known for his consistent defense and promotion of the rights of working women and men through the Agency of Trade Union Organization. He has been impactful in negotiation, mediation, and policy advocacy regarding labor and human rights, and he's very passionate about promoting working people's social and economic rights through their self-organization and advocacy. And very importantly for us, he's a very old friend of the family. He was there from almost the very beginning, I believe. And so it's for us really gratifying that he has agreed to chair this function. And at this time, I hand over the role to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And good morning to all of you, dear friends and comrades. I'm very glad to be associated with this 30th anniversary celebration of Third World Network Africa. And I noticed that today all of us on the podium here are old comrades, you know, dating back from the 70s, actually. So yeah, it's there, and as for yeah, we go back even to school before we became comrades in the university as we worked together. Likewise, Rose, who I met in the late 70s, and also Charles, all of whom were activists with us in the student movement before we moved on to other endeavors. Third World Network Africa is really one of the most important non-state actors which has geared its work towards the integration of Africa. And we are happy to join you in celebrating your success. When we came in, as we were doing the registration, some videos were being shown of some of the work that TWN Africa has been doing over the years, particularly in mining, work covering mining communities, work supporting small-scale miners, artisanal miners in mining communities, both in gold and salt, to assert their rights, mainly against big capital and also sometimes big capital supported by the state. So long before talk of Galamsey became so big in this country, those who have followed TWN's work know that they have been involved in trying to promote the rights of small-scale miners to work in ways that benefit miners and their communities, and not in ways that destroy the environment and water bodies. This fight is ongoing, and I would like to believe that now that there is so much public attention on Galamsey, illegal mining, we may join hands in various ways to address the challenges of mining in ways that actually benefit us in this country. Because as we know, the resources exist around the country, and you just can't say that they should continue to stay in the earth. But if we are going to mine them, we must mine them in ways that we benefit from them, especially first in the communities themselves and then in the larger society. Pauline's introduction gave indications of the range of areas in which TWN has been engaged in trade and investment, particularly work with the WTO, helping non-state actors and even governments to know how to intervene with the WTO. But also more recently, a lot of work on the African Continental Free Trade area. What I think is quite distinctive about TWN's work is the way in which it reaches out and builds partnerships with other non-state actors. Pauline mentioned that I was General Secretary of the ITC Africa for many years, and for many years we worked with TWN, with the African Mining Vision, with climate justice and all that. So we are happy that today TWN is celebrating its 30 years, and we are going to be listening to Dr. Al Graham, who has been coordinator of TWN Africa since it began. Yao is an alumnus of St. Augustine's College, Senior High School. That's what it is today, St. Augustine Senior High School. But we used to call it St. Augustine's College, way back then in Cape Coast. After senior high school, I studied law at the University of Ghana, and then went on to obtain an LLM in international and comparative law from the Free University of Brussels in Belgium, and later on a PhD from the University of Warwick, Coventry in the UK. When Yao finished with his formal studies and came back, one of his main jobs was to start as the founding editor of Public Agenda, Public Agenda newspaper. But beyond working as a journalist, he has also worked as an expert for various UN organizations and also for the African Union. He was a member of the International Study Group on the reform of Africa's mining regimes, set up by the UN Economic Commission for Africa and the AU Commission. And this produced the Minerals and Africa Development, produced a report, Minerals and Africa's Development. This was in 2011. And it was this report that anchored also the intellectual processes around the African Mining Vision and its to the 2011 action plan. I was also part of the team which produced the Country Mining Vision Guidebook 2014 and the Africa Mineral Governance Framework 2017. He is a member of the editorial working group of the Review of African Political Economy. So today, we'll be listening to Al Graham on TWN Africa, organizing for equitable and for transformative policies, organizing for equitable and transformative policies. Brothers and sisters, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Al Graham to take the floor.
Good morning to all of you. And we say thanks very much for agreeing to chair this event. I think it's appropriate at the beginning of this presentation to thank the employees of Third World Network Africa, past and present, members of its Executive Council, partner organizations, including funders who made it possible for TWN Africa to work and survive to 30. I want to also especially thank Charles Abugre, who is sitting here with us, whose vision and drive led to the creation of Third World Net Africa. Charles brought the founding group together and set up what started as the Africa Secretariat of Third World Network. And in fact, Charles was the founding coordinator of Third World Network Africa. Third World Network Africa was founded 10 years after the creation of the International Third World Network, which was the product of an international conference held in Penang, Malaysia, where a group of activists around the world who were concerned about the growth of neoliberalism came together to set up a network through which they would promote the development of the global south and also to challenge the dominance of neoliberalism. Incidentally, Third World Network reached its 40th anniversary on the 14th of November. TWN Network Africa actually was founded in August 1994, but we started the celebration this month. So incidentally, our anniversary here also is a moment to give a shout to our colleagues in Malaysia and wish them also the best as they mark 40 years. I think it's also important to thank ISODEC, who hosted TWN Africa in its first 4 years and has been a key partner in the life of the organization. 30 years on from when TWN Africa was founded, it is firmly established as an influential and respected Pan-African policy advocacy organization, which has made important contributions in the areas of international and investment policy, minerals and development, finance, and policy alternatives in a number of other areas. TWN Africa is working with partners in Ghana, across Africa and the world, has worked for policies that challenge the dominant neoliberal order and for equitable and transformative alternatives. We can proudly point to more than 25 years of working with labor organizations, producers organizations of artisanal and small-scale miners, farmers, and industrial producers to promote policies which challenge things that negatively affect them. In Ghana, mining-affected communities in particular have been a key part of the groups that we have supported and worked with. Currently, the most exemplary illustration of this problem that mining communities face is what is happening around the Adar-Songo Lagoon, where the government has, in a move of illegality and inequity, decided to hand over the whole lagoon to a party crony. That decision has been ruthlessly enforced with the use of state security operatives amidst widespread human rights violations. TWN Africa has and continues to support the struggle of the Adar people against injustice. For more than a decade, TWN Africa has championed an approach to illegal artisanal and small-scale gold mining in Ghana, which addresses the negative environmental consequences whilst also attacking the multiple drivers, including criminality of the high and mighty, alongside the livelihoods needs of the unemployed youth and impoverished farmers. This is the context for our partnership with the Ghana National Association of Small-Scale Miners to defend their right to exist and work in a climate where, incidentally, people end up conflating illegal mining with legal miners, with the result that actually, with that approach, the only legal miners who will be left in the landscape are the large-scale foreign-owned miners, and Ghanaian enterprise will be destroyed. We are proud of 30 years, 3 decades of work on international trade and investment issues, stretching back to the first days of the World Trade Organization. TWN Africa and its partners are engaged in building critical understanding among African citizens on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And the key vehicle for this work has been the Africa Trade Network, which TWN and other organizations founded, more than 25 years ago. We continue to build on our role in the development of the agenda of the African Mining Vision. TWN Africa and its partners are working to ensure that Africa's critical minerals are exploited to support the continent's energy transition and not become additional raw material exports for paltry mineral revenues. 30 years ago, the creation and mission of TWN Network Africa was a challenge to the dominance of neoliberal policies in Africa and the world, and the claim that there was no alternative that accompanied it. The creation of TWN Africa was also about contributing to African agency in choice and expression in the international policy arena. From 1984, Ghana speedily established itself as the African star of neoliberal economic policies. By the mid-1990s, more than 40 African countries had implemented SAPs. Many countries were weighed down by debt. In 1994, the shoots of political liberalization were spreading across the continent, including Ghana, but many countries were still under authoritarian rule or caught up in conflict. Policy advocacy in the international arena and crisis and debt-ridden African countries which had lost their agency became important. In the international arena, the loss of agency by African countries meant that the continent was subjected to policies devised by the Bretton Woods institutions and allied Western donors acting through the United Nations and other international institutions. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc turned the US into a hyperpower, fronting a Western exuberance about the dominance of neoliberalism and Western values. The political scientist Francis Fukuyama famously expressed the mood of Western exuberance when he declared in his 1992 book, The End of History and the Last Man, that the unchallenged dominance of the West and its political values after the Cold War marked the end of history. In Africa and the global South, however, citizens crushed by SAP's policies and struggling for political space were insistent on making their own history. In its first years, TWN Africa was an active participant in the global movements, democratic accountability of African governments, the struggle for civic space and free expression by citizens against the authoritarian reflexes of public institution officials are all issues which have been highlighted over the past 30 years of struggle around trade and investment issues and extractives, not only by Third World Network Africa, but by other organizations. The collapse of the mineral economy from the 1980s was a key factor in Africa's economic decline. And in Ghana, in 1980, the Liman government took a decision to try to revive the gold industry. When the PNDC came to power and became a champion of structural adjustment policies, it played a pioneer. Ghana was a pioneer in the liberalization of the mining sector in Africa with the passage in 1986 of a law which opened up the space for foreign investors and proceeded also to legalize artisanal small-scale mining in 1989. Mining policy, however, was primarily focused on gold, as the government was interested in quickly reviving export earnings. Ghana's path of liberalization became the model for most African countries in the wave of liberalization that followed from the 1990s, framed by the World Bank strategy for African mining. Over the past 3 decades, the African mining industry has revived and expanded not only in traditional mining countries, but also there have been many new entrants into mining. The commodity boom driven by the consumption of China and other Asian countries has been very important in this revival. In the process of liberalization and privatization, national mining companies, which used to be dominant across Africa, have disappeared. And the sector is now dominated by transnational corporations, except in some North African countries and South Africa to some extent. In most of Sub-Saharan Africa, however, local capital has been confined to the artisanal and small-scale mining sector and to providing services. In the process, public ownership in African countries has been hollowed out. And Ghana is a good example of the hollowing out of public ownership to be replaced by the dominance of foreign capital. TWN can rightly claim to have played a key role in the transformation of public awareness and attitudes on minerals and development issues in Ghana. Since the first wave of privatization and granting of new concessions to transnational corporations, official propaganda has focused on celebrating the amount of foreign direct investment coming in to the country and the prospects for earning revenue and foreign exchange from exports. Today, Ghanaians have a more sophisticated cost-benefit analysis of the role and contribution of mining. What are the impacts on those directly affected by mining projects? How much were their views taken into account in their decisions to grant the concessions? What is the actual cost benefit of these projects? What is the accountability of governments and foreign companies for the revenue and earnings? Are there any linkages being developed between the mining sector and the rest of the economy? These are some of the questions which have become routine in how people in Ghana approach the role of the mining sector. TWN's work on mining in Ghana from the very beginning has been through partnerships, not only in Ghana but also across the continent. In Ghana, the key partnerships in the formative period of the late 1990s was with a group of individuals and organizations who founded the National Coalition of Mining in 2001. WACAM and the Center for Public Interest Law were very key actors in that regard. The relationship with WACAM was key in connecting TW Africa with the earliest victims of the new open cast gold mining, which had transformed the Wassa West district around Takwa into the area with the largest concentration of open cast mines in the world. We have to remember that before the 80s, gold mining in Ghana was largely underground. So there was a technological shift, which also had consequences in terms of the impact of the mining industry. In 2001, TWN Africa published a seminal book on mining impacts in Ghana, titled Boom and Dislocation. We want to express our thanks to Professor Thomas Akabza, who led that research, because that was a signal moment in TWN's establishment as an analytical and advocacy authority in mining in Ghana. The research was aided in an important way by the connections that the leaders of WACAM, Daniel and Hannah Osu-Kranting, had in the area. The model of how we worked in the Takwa area became a template for our work in other parts of the country subsequently. Today, and as a result of what we learned from that beginning and which we have adapted, TWN has worked with and has supported the self-organization and expression of communities affected by mining all over the country, and also their voice and participation in national policy processes around mining. We have worked with communities in the salt mining areas along the Keta Lagoon. We have worked with communities in Ahafo around the Newmont mine. We work with organizations in the middle belt of the country on gold issues in Obuasi and other areas. And also, as the gold frontier has moved to the northern part of the country, we have also formed partnerships with organizations in that part of the country. Today, we can say that TWN has contributed to the emergence of a genuine network, national network of organizations with common purpose around about minerals and development issues centered around gold in Ghana. Gold is very important in Ghana, more than any mineral, partly also because government policy has focused on it, basically following the market logic that gold is the most sought after mineral. It's fair to say that the primacy of gold in Ghana's mineral sector is a result of the government following the lead of the investors, rather than deciding on a policy which prioritizes a minerals and development strategy, which therefore would have given minerals with greater utility more prominence. In a certain sense, if you look at the negative externalities of gold, a lot of waste material, large areas dug up, there's a lot of focus on galamsey and these negative impacts, which is important. But in reality, the large-scale mines have actually also been given more than 1 million acres of prime forest and farmland. In fact, the first intervention that TWN and its allies made about the negative impacts of mining in this country was not around galamsey, but about the pollution coming from large-scale mines and their effects on communities. And the struggles remain of mining-affected communities affected by the impacts of large-scale mines. So even as we worry about galamsey, we should also be interested in the way in which the mining frontier is spreading, the gold mining frontier is moved all the way up north, and there seems to be a relentless commitment to mining gold wherever it is found. We need to ask whether it is possible, or is it not necessary, to think about gold within a larger framework which seeks balanced outcomes in terms of how minerals are exploited, in terms of competition with other land use choices. I think there are a number of important issues which we need to pay attention to, alongside the question of impacts. There's the issue of the accountability of our governments and public institutions for how minerals, which are public resources, are used and exploited. There's been a de facto privatization of these minerals with very little accountability and an axis between governments and large-scale foreign companies in the exploitation of these minerals. There's also the question about the role affected communities play in decision-making about the siting and development of projects. The place of artisanal and small-scale mining is also an important issue. There's an overriding commitment in public policy to large-scale mining, so that even in areas where it's arguable that the strategy of prioritizing small-scale mining will be more beneficial in a developmental sense than handing things over to large-scale seems to be out of the equation. And I think the issue of salt is a particular example. All over the world, small-scale salt producers are a very important part of the landscape, and also its role in rural livelihoods, income generation, and preventing rural-urban drift. These are factors even more important than the government's focus on revenue, which seems to be a primary driver of why it gives gives priority to large-scale miners. And I think the new issue of critical minerals and their role, critical minerals for the production of renewable energy. In recent times, there's been a lot of focus on lithium, but it's important to remember that actually, before lithium came, Ghana was already exploiting manganese. Ghana has bauxite, which produces aluminum, all of which are very important for the future of electricity generation and production. The debate has been around the lithium mine and the revenue that is going to come and so on. But it is important that, given the link between the energy transition and Africa's transformation, we begin to make even more urgent the discussions that we need to bring to bear on the critical minerals. And all these issues are framed by the fact that since 2009, the agenda of the African Mining Vision offers a framework within which a transformation of minerals and development policy can be undertaken. To date, the focus has been on how to increase revenue, and also some talk about linkages building, although in practice, very little has happened on that front. I want to move on and say a few things about TWN Africa's work around international trade and investment issues. The creation of the WTO in January 1995, 8 years after the initiation of the Ugo Round trade talks, transformed the international trade and investment regime. One of our old colleagues, the late Raghavan, described the WTO as coming like a thief in the night, because many countries who were subsequently affected didn't know what was actually unfolding. Many African countries did not actively play a part in the negotiations. But the liberalizing logic of the WTO has come to affect virtually all international trade and investment frameworks. So the pressures that African countries came under through the economic partnership agreements flow directly from the logic of the WTO. We in Third World Network and many others had the expectation that Africa's own continental free trade agreement would serve as a corrective to the effects of the WTO logic. However, as I will explain a bit later, this has not been the case. The AfCFTA, sadly, is also infected with the free trade logic of the WTO template. Third World Network Africa was one of the first African organizations to engage with the WTO. We took the lead with others in the creation of the Africa Trade Network, which became the primary vehicle through which African organizations worked first on the WTO and subsequently on other trade issues, including, in the current period, the AfCFTA. TWN Africa was an active player in key global moments in efforts by the Global South and other global activists to stop the expansion of the WTO. TWN Africa and other Africa Trade Network activists were present in Seattle when the talks ran into crisis and the fissures in the WTO expanded. And critically, were also present in Cancun in 2003 when developing countries succeeded in stopping the expansion of the WTO. It is fair to say that since Cancun, the WTO has been a crippled entity. But that has not stopped the free trade logic, of course, from beginning to find its channels and proliferations into that other areas. The ATN, based on its experience from work on the WTO, was a critical vehicle for how African organizations responded to the dangers posed by the European Union's economic partnership agreements. For more than a decade, TWN and its allies struggled against the free trade logic of the EPAs. Although the EPAs were signed in many regions, it is fair to say that the resistance of African citizens supported by organizations like the ATN, which brought together a broad range of actors, NGOs, trade unions, producers, small and big, managed to substantially derail the broad logic of the EPA. Sadly, when it came to the creation of the AfCFTA, the hope, the expectation that the AfCFTA would help repair the damage caused by the WTO and the EPAs have not been fulfilled. Some of the same procedural mistakes of inadequate consultation and engagement with affected constituencies has marked the work around the AfCFTA. The AfCFTA's free trade logic is now fully embodied in the completed protocols. A lot of citizens have not engaged with the AfCFTA because it seems many people conflated their own Pan-African expectations of a kind of Kwame Nkrumah type integration with the reality or the AFCAT actually was in practice. With the conclusion of the protocols, the challenges inherent in the design are becoming visible in the implementation phase. And this is an issue that we would like to suggest that more and more people should engage with, because this is an African problem, and only we Africans can solve it. The AFCFTA and the African Mining Vision are two protocols which, in a way, flow from Africa's rediscovery of its own agency with the adoption of Agenda 2063. Agenda 2063 set out a vision for Africa's transformation. And under that, a number of things have been adopted. And the adoption of Agenda 2063 also brought back to the fore issues of Africa's structural economic transformation. And the issue of Africa's structural economic transformation, and critically the issue of industrialization, which had fallen off the agenda, is very much part of the issues that TWN Africa has engaged itself with. In Ghana, the present government announced Ghana Beyond Aid and also set out two programs which we thought were important markers of the direction in which we should be going if we want to undertake structural economic transformation. These are the One District, One Factory project, and also Planting for Food and Jobs. We carried out research on these two projects, and the results are disappointing. The gap between proclamation, implementation, and therefore the results has meant that, as the researchers on the Planting for Food and Jobs concluded, that the Planting for Food and Jobs is largely one huge fertilizer subsidy program, which really has not been interested in the more fundamental questions facing the agrarian sector. The lack of coordination between the Planting for Food and Jobs and the One District, One Factory meant that the transformative possibilities also of the One District, One Factory were not achieved. And then there were also issues of incoherence, in the program. Today, Ghana, like many countries actually, as a result of the commodity boom, even as there's talk about structural economic transformation, primary commodity export dependence has actually intensified. That intensification and the problems that it generates in terms of volatility and subjection to global processes have been an important reason for the crisis that many African countries face, including those who are suffering debt. We know that once COVID hit and the international economy closed down, many African countries began to suffer. Of course, in the Ghanaian case, the crisis has been compounded by mismanagement and corruption. So that as we are here marking 30 years of TWN, the context within which TWN started, where debt and crisis was an important part of the context, has emerged in some important ways. But the global context of today is different in several regards. Multilateralism, which was an important context within which TWN Africa and its global allies operated, is in crisis. A declining United States of America is lashing out at its main challenger, China. The climate emergency and the energy transition are key new elements of the global situation. And there's a recognition that planetary limits must guide consumption, which also has implications for countries who engage in raw material production and export. Africa's needs and imperatives, however, remain largely unchanged in this situation. The structural issues, the primary commodity dependence, the current issues of the debt overhang, and the fact of Africa being a resource battleground remain very key, are key issues. Politically, many Africans are faced with choiceless electoralism in their own countries. We head into an election and a lot of debate about what are the policy alternatives that any of the parties could be offering. But all these go to show that growth as such, without transformation, really is not the way forward for the continent. And where we are 30 years after we started TWN Africa, although we can point to some shifts and having contributed to some critical successes, great tasks remained to be addressed. And in that regard, I think I want to refer to elements of a declaration that was adopted in April 2002, when TWN Africa and Codesria hosted a conference to discuss the new Partnership for Africa's Development, which was being touted as the way forward for the continent. That conference basically rejected the neoliberal logic of NEPAD and asserted that whatever we do sectorally, without an overarching framework of transformation, which anchors sectoral choices, Africa's crisis would continue to recur. Growth over the past 30 years, driven by the commodity boom, has enlarged African economies. But inequalities, large numbers of people remain in poverty, and economies remain fragile. And in that declaration, we concluded that an alternative framework was critical for Africa to be able to go forward. And that alternative framework must have an agenda for how Africa operates in the international economic environment, taking account of the changes that have taken place now, including new actors like China and Turkey and so on. Last year, the biggest investor in Africa was not China, but the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. All of these countries have agenda in Africa. So how Africa acts in the international environment is very key. At the local level, local, national, regional, and Pan-African level, development policy must promote the productive sectors and also public services to ensure that Africa and its citizens are prepared and able to build economies, with intersectoral linkages. The state, which has been reconfigured to service foreign capital and also neoliberal projects across Africa, has to be reconstituted into a developmental state. A state for which social equity, social inclusion, respect for human rights form the base of economic policy. A state which actively promotes and nurtures the productive sectors of the economy, actively engages appropriately in the equitable and balanced allocation and distribution of resources among sectors and people, and most importantly, a state that is democratic and which integrates people's control over decision-making at all levels in the management, equitable use, and distribution of social resources. Now, this demand ultimately is a political demand because we're in a country where we've seen examples of shrinking civic space, not only in the brutalization of communities in mining-affected areas, but recently, at the national level, protesters who scandalously were hauled off and locked away for weeks over petty incidents connected with exercising the right of expression. We live in a country where these things are going on in spite of the explicit provisions of the Constitution, which place an obligation on the state as part of its developmental responsibility to create an enabling environment for people to express themselves and defend their roles in the development process. The call here for a certain kind of state is also a demand for a certain type of political class who are able to develop a vision of leadership and transformation. For 30 years, Third World Network Africa has worked for the realization of that vision in various sectors, but more broadly also in the formulation of alternatives and a development paradigm which is transformative for Africa. And we look forward in the coming years to continue to work with our partners around this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much. Another round of applause for. You actually managed to save some funds. Before we open up for a discussion, we are going to have two discussants. And the first will be Dr. Rose Mensah-Kuti, who is the Executive Director of the Accra-based West African Regional Office of Abantu for Development, a women's rights organization which promotes women's rights and gender justice in policies in Ghana as well as in Africa and beyond. Abantu hosts the Women's Manifesto Coalition and the Gender Action on Climate Change for Equality and Sustainability, both in Ghana. Rose served as a convener of the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana, NetRight, in 2005 to 2009, and also provided leadership for the development of the Women's Manifesto for Ghana in 2004. As those of you who know the Women's Manifesto will know that it's a living political but non-partisan document that outlines key issues of concern to women and makes demands for addressing them. Dr. Rose Mensah-Kuti holds a PhD in Gender and Energy Studies from the University of Birmingham, in the UK. She also holds a master's degree in Development Studies from the Institute of Social Studies, the Netherlands. She attended the University of Ghana, Legon, where she had her first degree, and also from where she holds a graduate diploma in journalism and mass communication. Rose has carried out research and several assignments on energy, water, climate change, oil and gas from a gender justice perspective for international, regional, and national agencies. She's also the proud recipient of a special award, namely the Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Social Justice and Peace in 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rose Mensah-Kuti.
Okay. See you after the event. Yeah. Yeah, I don't like that.
Mr. Kwesi Mankwa. I show you. Oh, okay. Is it on? Yes. Okay. It's okay now? Okay. So thank you very much, Mr. Kwesi Dramankwa. I thought I had sent in a shorter version about myself, but that was not to be. I think today is a day for celebration because 30 years of setting up a process of engaging with different actors through the establishment of the Third World Network, which derived its existence from a relationship with the International Third World Network based in Malaysia. It's no small feat. I think 30 years is worth celebrating. And I think those of us here are privileged to be part of this celebration. So we want to take this opportunity to celebrate the Third World Network Africa for making it possible for this amazing piece of work to be done. So congratulations, Third World Network. Similar to what the coordinator of Third World Network did by acknowledging the role of the staff, I would want to also add my voice to that. These days, we all bandy around the word sustainability, sustainable development, sustainability, and what have you. And I think that much of the work that Third World Network Africa has succeeded in doing is because of the commitment of the staff. I was pleasantly surprised that when I got here, I saw many of the people who were there several years ago when I used to go there regularly, either to support TWN's work or to try to forge the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana, which has now come to stay as a strong space and voice on issues of women's rights in Ghana. And so that is very important, and it says something about TWN Africa and its commitment to making women's rights, gender equality, issues of feminism as a center point of all the struggles that it has engaged in. And so I want to also acknowledge all the staff who have remained, not because salaries are good, but because the work is uplifting, the work is worthwhile doing, and we hope that in the coming years, you will serve as role models and mentors for newer intergenerational persons who will come in. Dr. Yao Graham talked about TWN's work and focused quite extensively on the work that it has done with small-scale miners in terms of shaping policy, in terms of providing leadership at the Africa continental level about some of the policies that will really position us in ways that will enable us to negotiate better within the context of the neoliberal economy that he alluded to. Now, I think that that work is so important and so critical, and we must always remind ourselves of our histories regarding the work that we have done over the years in particular sectors of the economy. And I think one of the things that Third World Network Africa has to bring back is the language, or what I might want to refer to as naming. Because now we all say galamsey, we all say illegal mining, without unpacking and trying to understand what is really behind those words. For Third World Network, framing has always been very critical because they have always positioned themselves on the side of the marginalized, on the side of those who are least able to have their voices heard, to have their issues heard, and who are often the ones who lose when powerful institutions and individuals are engaging with resources at every level that you can imagine. And so I think that issues of benefit to local miners, and they were able to really focus on small-scale miners in Ghana. And so it was not as if they were condoning the illegality or they were condoning the destruction of the environment, the pollution of our waters and so on. But they were saying that it is legitimate for ordinary citizens, poor people who live in our communities and who are interested in mining, to do it in ways that can be of benefit to them, in the same way as those who come in from outside the country to engage in mining. And so the power relationship issue that has been central to TWN's work is something that we really must pay attention to, because they always recognize that there are inequalities embedded in social relations, embedded in policy-making processes, and embedded in how policies are implemented on the ground. And they position themselves to interrogate these kinds of unequal power relationships so that they will always be on the side of those who are least able to benefit from such processes. And I think this is the stance or the ideology that has formed the basis of the work that they have done. And so if you take issues of trade and investment, particularly in relation to the World Trade Organization, this is exactly what they have done, looking to Africa's own interests, looking to national interests, and also citizens' interests. And when I talk about citizens, I'm talking about women, persons with disability, all the people who are least visible when we are thinking of our societies and how we are able to engage with policies and also the resources that are available in our context. And so for us as women's rights organizations, those of us who dare to call ourselves feminists, we think that our work has been enriched by the work of TWN, because whether it was issues of the World Trade Organization, whether it was about issues of the structure adjustment programs and so on, through our relationship and our partnership with Third World Network, we gained insights, deep insights about issues that we had not thought about before. For instance, I think the women's rights movement initially focused on issues of identity in that sense, because we're looking at the world and feeling that we have been so marginalized, we've been denied so many things, and then also that we were suffering a lot of discrimination and abuse. But the shift came when we realized that actually we are knowers, and that we can also make a case about how we know what we know and how these issues must be factored in public policy and in all decision-making processes across the globe. And that is how our association with TWN Africa has really gained us such recognition in this country, where we have a range of organizations that are members of the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana, where we are able to articulate the issues of concern to us, as for example, the ways in which we engage with the HIPIC issue and came up with programs and policies and alternatives that can really help us as women of Ghana who are usually marginalized and who experience inequalities in ways that is particularly gendered. Talking also about partnerships. So the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana, Third World Network was our second host. Initially, the idea was that we ourselves as women's rights organizations would try to host the network for a period of 2 years per organization. So the network started from the Gender Center, headed by Mrs. Kukapia. And after the 2 years, all our organizations were not strong enough to host the network. And so TWN offered. And at that time also, TWN had also supported the women's organizations, especially those of us who were a little bit at the forefront, to conduct a study where we were looking at the platform for action, the Beijing platform for action. And it is quite coincidental that next year is actually 30 years of the platform for action. And for Third World Network to be celebrating its 30 years, that it was able to hold our hand even at that time. So we conducted a study. Professor Georgie Chikata was the lead researcher, and some of us were also part of it. It was a continental-wide study. So we looked at institutional frameworks or machineries for women, because different countries had adopted different machineries to look at the issue of women. And we saw that depending on the kind of structure a country put in place, it had particular outcomes. But the general outcome was that these were just institutions that were set up, but were not fundamentally looking at issues of transformation, looking at issues of what women bring to the table, and trying to right the wrongs that have been done over the years for women. And so that even helped us. When the Ministry of Gender was being set up, we used that study to interrogate why that's kind of structure. But over time, we have just come to accept the ministry, and we are working with it, even though we did not initially think that that was the best way to deal with issues of concern to women. So I just want to underline that fact very strongly. And fortunately or unfortunately, the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana remained at TWN, because all of our organizations were always saying that we were not ready to host the network. And initially, Third World Network actually supported right to a point where we were becoming extremely dependent in terms of even looking at help supporting us to prepare our accounts and so on, free of charge and all of that. But over time, we became independent. We are still housed in TWN Africa, but many of all the processes, even though we partner with each other to do pieces of work, the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana is now completely autonomous, even though we are housed in Third World Network Africa. And I think this is an important model that we can all try to learn from and improve for other sectors or other organizations that do work that is so transformational. It is a very good model, hand-holding, making sure that some of the critical issues that are important to us as African people, we get organizations that are there, that are stronger, and then they hold you, and then you become independent, and then you also become a strong voice in the society. About several years ago, I had an engagement with one development organization, and the person, the head of that organization said, it is very important to have strong African institutions that will articulate the issues that are of concern to us, and that will be able to stand the test of time and be able to challenge the neoliberal economic framework, transnational corporations, and what have you. And I think TWN has proven that, and it is very important that it has. And then we have the women's rights organization that it has hand-holded, also becoming a force to reckon with. I can assure you that there is no policy discussion in Ghana today where the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana is not consulted. And of course, our views are not always taken, but our stance resonates with the stance that TWN, should I say, trained us on, and we are still at it. We are still at it. We have not compromised on our positions on inequalities, on our position on fairness, on our positions on inclusiveness, and what have you. One of the areas where perhaps Dr. Yao Graham didn't speak much about is the publications. I think TWN is very strong on its publications. They have a magazine called Resurgence, and then they had one on Third World Africa Agenda, of which those days when we were younger and we were full of energy, we used to write and contribute to those. We are not doing it anymore, but I think we need to work much more on the intergenerational thing so that the younger people will take an interest in this. I am very much concerned about the political thinking and approaches that we use these days. It's like we just do things because that is how things are done. I think that we need to go back and learn from organizations like Third World Network about their political stance, their strong political stance on transformation and equity principles, because really this is what will inure benefits to the majority of our citizens. Issues of, and one of the things Yao Graham said, which I would want to point to, is the accountability issues that he referred to. I think this is very critical. It is not like the past where you cannot advocate for transformative approaches in dealing with social issues, economic issues, and political issues. Even if you take the energy sector, so much work has been done in terms of recognizing that actually access to energy and its use, in fact, production, access, and use of energy is actually gendered. And significant requirements, principles are in place for even these multinational corporations and so on to comply with. So these will be minimum accountability requirements that we should be aware of and really struggle to make sure that they are in place, whether it is in the area of mining, trade, investment, or what have you. So it is very, very important that TWN has taken its work very seriously. It does a lot of research, policy advocacy, and also institutional strengthening. I think institutional strengthening, it's actually one of its core achievements, because I talked about the staff, and I talked about the fact that there are very few heads of organizations in Ghana here who will call themselves coordinator. I think coordinator is usually referred to lower level staffing, but Yao Graham has kept this title since inception, and I think it's important. And sometimes we listen, I think sometimes we listen a bit too much to the donor community, and so they put pressure on us to do this. I think we must always remember what our issues are and how we deal with them within the spaces that we occupy. There was also the mention of a book that has been produced by Thomas Akabza on mining. And I would like to say that that book, which was actually supported by Third World Network, helped us a lot, and even coming into contact with somebody like Thomas Akabza. So when Ghana was developing the legal frameworks for petroleum, oil, and gas work in Ghana, we, as the Network for Women's Rights in Ghana, benefited a lot because we were able to work with that knowledge and with that person in order to bring in a gender perspective into the ways those laws were being framed. And I think this is something, it is a strong legacy that TWN has given us as the women's rights organizations, recognizing that it is okay for us to speak about inequalities. It is okay for women's rights organizations to present their issues in ways that increases the quest for transformation and equity. In terms of going forward, I think Dr. Yao Graham mentioned a number of things looking at the current context within which this kind of work can continue. I think the knowledge and the stance of TWN Africa, its struggle against neoliberalism, I think is so critical. And they have produced so much knowledge. And I think that knowledge should be out there. I don't know what form that can take, but I don't know whether it can establish an institute of some sort of learning, because it is needed, especially among the younger generation, because we cannot keep all this knowledge in books, because there are different forms of engagement now, social media, what have you. And so I think this work has to really translate into information that equip people to think in transformative ways, to think beyond the status quo, so that we can ensure that marginalized groups really benefit from the resources that we have in our country. Climate change issues, a whole lot of work that has been done by Third World Network. And once again, I think that knowledge is always different from the mainstream, and that is also an area where Third World Network must do very well in terms of sharing that information in a very popular and broader sense. The energy transition issues and how we become much more aware about the nuances. So it's not like it's just a flat, a neutral ground that we are playing in. There are power relations involved, and we must ensure that we continue to interrogate these issues in ways that is really informative and beneficial to us as Ghanaians. I've always wondered whether the policy engagement work of TWN Africa is sufficient in creating transformation, because we know in Ghana here, it is the political elite, and then also we have the chiefs, we have the chiefs, and then we have the priests also, who are really very powerful. And even though TWN Africa engages with all of these different groupings, I am wondering how far TWN Africa can go again from this time on to bring the transformational agenda and the equity agenda in a way that actually infuses our country with alternatives and with ways of making sure that there is real transformation and that all citizens benefit from the resources that we generate in this country. So I think I'll just end on that note, and thank you once again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to invite our second and last discussant, Charles Abugri. Charles is the Executive Director of International Development Economic Associates, IDEAS. So we'll be hearing some ideas today. Charles has been active in the civil society space in Ghana at Pan-African level and globally for decades. Nationally, he has catalyzed, contributed to, or co-created several civil society organizations, networks, coalitions, and campaigns, including ISODEC as an Integrated Social Development Center, the Third World Network Africa, the Center for Public Interest Law, the Ghana National Education Campaign Coalition, the Northern Ghana Network for Development, the Alliance for Reproductive Health Rights, CD Finance Foundation, which is a microfinance institution, and the National Coalition Against the Privatization of Water, among others. And at the Pan-African and global levels, Charles has been active in the Tax Justice Network, as well as the Trade Justice Movement, Jubilee Debt Coalition, among others. Charles is currently a development consultant and co-convener of the Foundation for Transformation of Marginal Areas, Tama Foundation Universal. Charles Abugri is a development economist by training. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Charles Abugri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It reminded me of roles I had forgotten of. But appreciated. First, I would like to sincerely congratulate Third World Network Africa for a remarkable achievement over 30 years. I left Third World Network Africa more than 20 years ago, so I have had little to do with its transformation to date. It's a household name across the continent. Third World Network Africa is a household name globally when it comes to matters of trade, finance, climate, and minerals. I am aware that it's not about to die soon. It has another 3 decades to go. So we should be, many of us will probably won't be there for the next 3 decades, but we pray that it does that. In congratulating Third World Network Africa, there are a number of people that remind me. 4 of them passed on, and 1 still alive, who it will be remiss not to acknowledge them in the journey that Third World Network Africa started in the 1990s. The first person is a South Asian woman called Agnes Joseph. Agnes Joseph used to work for a Dutch organization called NOVE. It was through Agnes Joseph that I got to know Martin Korkok-Penn, the founder, the first director of Third World Network International. Spent time with him, and he pushed us to establish Third World Network Africa. Martin Korkok was a protege of another Malaysian called Muhammad Idris. Muhammad Idris founded an organization called the Consumer Association of Penang, and it was under the Consumer Association of Penang that the conference was held to take a look at the consequences of the demise of the new international economic order at that time, and it's from this conference that Third World Network was created. I have Muhammad Idris also passed, and I would like to pay tribute to the 2 of them. The 2 remaining people I would like to pay tribute to is one is a Canadian and the other is a Ghanaian. Both also passed. The Canadian is a man called John Mihevik. In fact, he's called John Miheyo. John Miheyo used to be head of the Policy and Research Division of Kairos Canada, which is Justice and Peace Canada. It's a Catholic Church entity and movement. John was crucial, together with Agnes Joseph, in helping Third World Network Africa raise its first set of funds to get going. The last person I would like to acknowledge is a man called Dr. Joseph Awindor. Dr. Joseph Awindor was one of the very first staff members of Third World Network Africa. He was the only person who knew what to do with a computer. So he helped us to set up things that didn't have anything to do with computer. And it was partly his ability to spin what we could do with a computer that convinced the Canadians to give us some money. So I would like to pay tribute to Dr. Joseph Awindor. I want to frame my remarks around the themes that Pauline laid out as the key guiding themes for Third World Network Africa's work over the years. Beginning the globalization in Africa, and currently the work organized around Africa's economic transformation. Now, the context for the initial theme, globalization and Africa, has to be understood by the theme globalization Africa has to be understood by the context, the global context at that time. The 1990s was the third development decade of the United Nations. The first development decade of the United Nations was 1970s. It was in the 1970s that the concept of development, the support of developing countries, emerging out of colonization, became a prominent theme of the United Nations. It was in the first decade that the idea of development assistance and the commitment of developed countries to commit 0.7% of their GDP to support development. It was in this first decade conference of the United Nations that this concept of development assistance and the commitment of developed countries came into being. At that time, the metropolitan countries needed for their continuous industrialization the commodities of developing countries. This was the time that they were willing to make some concessions, including allowing commodity agreements to be established as a framework by which they could have a stable access to international commodities at stable prices in exchange for some sweetness. They recognized then that to expand commodity production, developing countries needed to invest in infrastructure, roads, railways, water systems, and so on and so forth, to expand the commodity production base. And so development assistance aid at that time made some sense to them. Fast forward to the third development decade of the 1990s. At that time, the metropolitan countries still were exporting countries. So the United States was still exporting machinery and equipment, but also food. Europe was a major exporter of finished goods and equipment, especially consumer goods. This is the context in which opening markets in developing countries became a central part of the interest of metropolitan countries. This was when they were pushing the WTO. And the singular interest was to open markets in developing countries, especially the large and middle income countries like India, China, and so on, Brazil, and the rest of it. For commodities, they had already established a dominant control over primary commodities, but it was the bigger markets they were trying to push. So in the fight in the WTO, you could see that countries like India fought to protect their farmers, their food, the sources of food, and the rest of us fought to reduce dumping into our countries. This was the agenda of the WTO. Two other elements of the WTO agenda, which then suited the metropolitan countries at that time, was market liberalization for finance and investment. So there were the investment treaties. At that time, transnational companies, large companies, profits were declining in the United States in particular. They fought to dismantle rules for the private sector, especially finance capital, domestically. Once they succeeded in doing so with Reagan and others, they then started to explore the liberalization of markets internationally. This was the beginning of financialization and the drive to financialize the world. This was when money was made simply by creating instruments and rather than investing in the real economy. So the WTO became an important instrument for opening markets not only for goods that they are exporting, but also for finance, where finance capital was becoming more and more dominant and important. So let's fast forward again. And it's in this context that in the 1990s, the real capital from the metropolis for the countries like ours, Ghana, commodity producing countries, what they were interested in was to take over the minerals and to take over the bits of the economy that still had some profits in them. This is how privatization became very dominant, but also liberalization of capital became dominant in our. These were all put together in the context of structural adjustment programs, the Washington Consensus. And the two most important institutions driving these was the IMF and the World Bank, supported by bilateral aid. And so in the 1990s, the relationship with the metropolis became the use of aid for the opening of markets, privatization, and the grabbing of assets. This was the context in which TWN picked up the work on mining, because one of the earliest attractions for liberalization and privatization was minerals. This was when we lost total control over the ownership of our minerals to date. Fast forward to now. We have a situation where the metropolitan countries are no more exporters. They are net importers. They import largely from China. This is one of the reasons why they lost interest in the WTO. The only part of the WTO they were interested in was regulation of technology, because they still have some dominant control of certain aspects of technology, and the liberalization of finance, federal liberalization of finance in large countries, developing countries, China, India, and others. At the moment, there are no more dominant players in technology. The nature of the economy has shifted, and so the metropolitan countries have not only become net importers of consumer goods and machinery, they are net importers also of technology. This is how China has become very important, even as investors in the metropolitan countries till now. But as Yao has mentioned, these countries have lost control over their hegemony, and so the last hooray to sustain some hegemonic control has been, in the case of the United States and Europe, the implementation of unilateral sanctions. So unilateral sanctions in trade, unilateral sanctions for finance. So unilateralism has supplanted multilateralism. So the old multilateral institutions become increasingly not relevant, except for the IMF, which is necessary for collecting debt. The rest have become generally irrelevant. And the second area of strength of the metropolitan countries is the area of militarization and military power. And that, as you can see, has become the dominant means of expression of control, which is increasingly pushing our world closer and closer to a global war. And so war as an instrument of domination of economies and unilateral trade and economic sanctions as an instrument for constraining transformation anywhere outside of the metropolis, including ours, has become the dominant factors. So where do we go from here, in order not to go rambling for a long time? So we have a situation in which Yao mentioned the question of commodity dependence. That one of the challenges for Africa, including Ghana, for economic transformation is how to move away from the dependence on commodities for exports, raw commodities. Well, we've lost a lot of that anyway, so except for cocoa, you don't really own the commodities. So we export them, gold prices go up, but we really get nothing out of it because we gave it all out. But Yao also mentioned we haven't yet completely given out everything. We have to keep in mind. So we still have lithium, there are possibilities of rare earth, and there are other minerals that are important for manufacturing and industrialization. So rather than being reactive, there is still room to become proactive in the way in which we deal with commodities. And perhaps we should stop giving out our natural resources in the name of attracting foreign direct investment. But that's a debate that has to be done. So that's one form of dependence. a dependence on the external market for the export of raw materials. There is a second dependence, and that is dependence on the foreign market for the import of food. So if you look at our import bill, we now exceed over $1 billion in the importation of food to feed ourselves in this country. That's not only a sovereignty and security question, it's really an economic suicide to have land, resources, poison them, refuse to invest in feeding ourselves, and depend increasingly on the import market. That's the second area of dependence we must address. The third area of dependence we must address is the dependence on energy. So we have gas, we have crude oil, but we actually are net importers of petroleum. So the combination of the dependence on food and the dependence on energy exports has translated into another dependence, which is the dependence on foreign exchange for the financing of our development. So we prioritize foreign exchange over our local currency. Although at our stage of development, the money that actually matters is local money, the stability of local money. We need cities to build schools, and the component of dollars that go into building schools are limited. We need cities to build hospitals. We need cities to build roads. So in a way, we run a macroeconomic program that ends up further entrenching us in a dependency on foreign exchange that we do not have a control of, because we are depending on raw materials whose prices we do not have a control of, to raise the foreign exchange in order to finance the critical imports that we need, which we could produce, which is food and energy. That dependency is absolutely critical. And the final thing is technology and skills. Yao raised the issue of lithium. So lithium's importance is that it is a potential commodity for the new technologies. We are dependent on technologies we could invest on, and therefore unable to produce the skills necessary for economic transformation. I would want to contend that TWN's agenda in the following months is to address these interconnecting dependencies. And to do so, it is impossible to do so without a serious understanding of the role of the state. Unfortunately, we are so disappointed by our leaders that we actually are actively happy to help dismantle the state. I followed the conversations about debt and debt relief, and I've heard civil society people say, these people are such crooks that we should not reward them with debt relief. But we've forgotten that these crooks don't pay debts. It is ordinary people's taxes that pay the debts. We are so disappointed with the state that we no more have a forward-looking positive agenda for the state. Without a positive agenda for the state, these multiple transformations are impossible, because there is no historical evidence of transformation outside of an active role of the state. Thank you very much, and I wish TWN Network Africa a very next 30 years.
So there you are. We've heard from our lead speaker, Dr. Yao Graham. We have heard from Rose Benson Kutin, and then we've heard from Charles Abugri. So now I would like to open the floor for a conversation, comments or questions, which our panelists will happily respond to. We will first take maybe a round of 5, and then so we'll go on for about the next. I'm going to have a break. For the next 40 minutes or so, with comments and questions. Yes, you, please.
Thank you. I'm Kojo Krakani. We'll see how. I'm from Closac. I think we have to commend the civil organizations' work, the role you are playing, especially Dr. Graham's TWN Africa. But I have a simplistic way I think we should go if we want to do an impact. Very simplistic. You see us here. We were all coming from certain communities, various communities which we return once in a while from the cities. This exercise is good. I wonder how many of us will go to replicate these things here. It is an eye-opening exercise. It is an advocacy exercise, and therefore we must get to the people whose decisions influence the choice of people who take decisions for us. So if you can organize, or madam, you can organize Charles to the hinterland, sessions of this nature, opening the eyes of people about things. You are talking about world trade, we are talking about food for the people. We are now talking about importing food Ghana, and we are talking about Ghanaian farmers waiting for rain-fed agriculture. So if we can go further, I'm saying what we are doing here is fine, but I wonder how many of us go back to replicate. So if you can do an agenda, your national program, and go to the hinterland and open the eyes of the people more, so that their voice added to yours will have a big impact in the selection of things that will come. I'm talking about if Ghana has any national agenda, Ghana has any national development plan, where whoever comes in with these fine ideas will be forced to implement them without any collaboration. Are you getting me? Thank you very much.
Hello. This one here. Yeah, I will come there. Okay. You have the mic already. Okay, so please, after our brother there. Yeah.
Okay,
Just
so
hold on, you talking after you.
my question goes to Dr. Graham. And
First, you introduce yourself and then.
Yeah, my name is Emmanuel Ejedan, so I work with Industrial Global Union based in Switzerland, but I'm with the African office. So, Dr. Graham, first of all, thank you so much. Through the TWN network, the Ghana Workers Union, where I was the head of research, we were able to collaborate with the National Association of Small-Scale Mining. Initially, we just didn't want to even have anything to do with small-scale mining. But my question is, how well have you, as TWN network, really delved into the matter of the small-scale miners, the Association of Small-Scale Mining, in terms of their constituents? The issue of the collapse of illegal and legal. When you really delve into the association, are they only representing the legal stream? And also, what is the operationalization of legality? Yes, we know that you need to get a licensing and all that, but the question of the state was not only about the license regime, but also about the methodologies in which they were mining. What have you done so far in terms of helping the small-scale mining? And then to Dr. Rose, one of the issues we are really struggling with our work with small-scale mining with Industrial, though we are working together under our innovative program, is how to really ensure gender mainstreaming or inclusivity within the work of small-scale mining. The issue of patriarchy and social reproduction rules not really taken care of within the small-scale mining. The issue of sex for work, toxic masculinity within the small-scale mining framework. Within your work, how have you really dealt with all these things, all these issues within a small-scale mine, and how are you educating the small-scale miners on some of these things? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Kofi Lucas from Critical Strategic Thinkers Network. I want to look at it from this angle. Ghana, what is our priority? Let's take Daily Graphic, Friday, 21st July, front page. And it was captured. 7.3 million people face poverty. So let's run it up to 10 million. If the population then was 30 million. So 1/3 of the Ghanaian population face poverty. Let's add our educational institutions. Is it not possible that we use United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 1 and 2 as a yardstick so that we work towards that? Is it not possible? Whereby Sustainable Development Goal 2 say zero hunger. Nobody should complain of hunger. Breakfast, lunch, and supper. This was launched in 2012. And the target is by 2030. That's the target. So we are left with 6 years to go. What are we doing as a nation, as civil society? Do we ask political leaders that what do you have to enable us achieve by 2030 SDG 1 and 2? 1 is zero poverty, and then 2, zero hunger. So that you and I will make sure that nobody should complain of food by targeting the 10% of the Ghanaian population. Look at the street over there. See the young guys. What are we doing? Botswana, they got independence in 1966. From that time to date, university education is free. Can you believe this? It is thinking, critical thinking. What are we doing as a nation? As at now, Botswana, the students, if you are in boarding, if you are on campus, you are being given money. Apart from free education, if you are outside campus, you are being given money at the end of every month. What are we doing? It's critical thinking. But unfortunately, in Ghana and in Africa, part of Africa, if you don't have Godfather, forget it. All your thinking, God will call you and then you go and render your account. Where are we heading towards? What can we do as civil societies to push political parties that focus on SDG 1 and 2? What program do you have? Can we do something like that, of that nature? Else, I'm afraid, when God calls us, we'll all go and render our accounts. When I was coming, who knows the car that I bought it? Whether it was trotro. So why are we worrying ourselves with so many things? Why? Who knows what I ate this morning? Whether it's kopunti? Who knows? I'm standing here. Let's tell our people who are leading us that everyone here say it is not necessary. Save humanity. So that when God calls you, you go and render account one day.
Thank you.
So I'll pause. I wish it was a round table discussion so that I can come back again. But lectures, you have only one opportunity. After speaking, it ends there. Maybe when we close, then we can be interacting.
Yes.
God bless all of us.
Thank you. This one first is this woman here. Please introduce yourself and then we'll come to you. You'll be the first.
Thank you. My name is Nana Ikwianyidoho. I'm representing Feminist Africa and also the Center for Social Policy Studies at the University of Ghana. A couple of people have talked a bit about mining and irresponsible mining in particular. Mr. Charles Ebugre talked about our dependence of food and how that is becoming worse with what we are doing to the environment. So my question, knowing how involved TWN has been in this mining issue, I would like to get a perspective on the possibilities of dealing with irresponsible mining? I'm not talking about galamsey only, because there is legal mining that is very irresponsible in our forest reserves and so on. So as an organization that has been really at the forefront of this fight, what are the hopes that we can possibly deal with it, seeing how intricately now this kind of mining is tied up in shoring up the foreign exchange that we need, in shoring up partisan politics and vote buying? It has become part of the economy. Is there hope? And what direction can we possibly go in?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take the final question for the first round from the gentleman up there.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Emmanuel Bensa. I work in regional integration and communication spaces. So next year, 2025, is evidently a very important year for the sub-region. We have ECOWAS of maybe 12. That is going to turn 50. So we have an ECOWAS that is still stuck with the usual free movement challenges and so on and so forth. Then we have the three, the Sahel countries that have broken off and are moving towards Russia and whatever else. These are very important challenges that we're going to be facing going forward for the next decade or so. Some might say it's quite regrettable that in the year that ECOWAS turns 50, ECOWAS is not turning 50 as an ECOWAS of 15, but as an ECOWAS of 12. So, and yet at the same time, with existential crises coming from the Sahel and so on and so forth, what is TWN's position on, or how is TWN positioning itself to respond to some of these challenges? Because an ECOWAS of 12 with the new Association of Sahel States and all these different configurations are new threats that might have to face with, and how is TWN going to prepare itself to deal with some of these, as well as the positive sides, which is about the fact that West Africa continues to be fairly united around moving, more so than on the rest of the continent, and the lessons, therefore, West Africa can offer for the rest of the continent on enhancing protocols such as the Freedom of Movement Protocol. Thank you.
Yeah, so, panel, if we can get some responses, you can speak from there.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for your question about what we are doing regarding the issues of gender in the mining sector. I think what we have to be very clear about is that when it comes to issues of gender relations, gender inequality, it's actually, even though we are all working very hard to embed it in all our work that we do, it's actually the last when it comes to addressing them in a very transformative way. Indeed, when it comes to resources for the work that we do as civil society organizations and so on, it's actually the first cut. When resources are scarce, the cut goes first to the work that is done on gender equality issues. And so it's a long-term journey of the transformative journey. It is the long-term one. But at the same time, the ways in which we work has also kind of impacted on the outcomes. First of all, we try as much as possible as networks and coalitions to be respectful of the different organizations that constitute our membership. And so you can see that when it comes to mining specifically, even though we might engage at the policy level, when it comes to the practical work, we will leave organizations like WACAM, Women in Mining, Women in Energy, and which have sprung out of the work we have done earlier on, and out of the recognition of many of the organizations that we have alluded to as the new forms of domination and oppression that civil society organizations have worked hard to demand accountability. So new forms of organizing have come, new organizations have come, and they are actually trying very hard to make sure that the gender mainstreaming thing, but of course, we can interrogate the whole notion of gender mainstreaming. But I think one of the things we have tried to do is not to work in isolation when it comes to the themes. So for example, violence against women in the mines, equal participation in the processes of decision making, we see them as interconnected, or as people might say, intersectionality approach, where we are not focusing on a specific theme, but we see all of them as interlinked. Some organizations might focus broadly on a particular subset of the issue, but when you come to our level, I'm talking about the net right level, we see that interconnectedness, and we try as much as possible to work with the membership in ways that is respectful, that acknowledges their own interests and also their need to be transformational. So you have groups which are actually well established in the communities working on these things, but of course, when it comes to the policy engagement bit, it's the neutral space that we tend to use. But increasingly, we ourselves are sometimes guilty in the sense that we tend to move towards where the resources are. So sometimes you find us following our groups that we are trying to keep independent, even though they are members, and but that's how it goes. Yeah. Thank you.
Charles?
It works. Does it work? It works. Yeah. No question was asked me, but I wanted to respond to two things. One is the irresponsible mining question. I think the roots of the irresponsible mining question is the collapse of the regulatory role of the state. First and foremost, if we had a more responsible state, there will be areas that there just would be no mining, and you enforce the laws. Every mining event competes with an alternative livelihood path. When you do an assessment of the value of mining, it is always about foreign exchange. There's never the opportunity cost, what is lost by doing mining. So the environment is one, but just livelihoods and food and clean water are all things you lose by emphasizing foreign exchange, which you never really quite control anyway. So this power of foreign exchange in our psychic is allowing for irresponsible state behavior, would be my response to that. On ECOWAS, I'll be curious to read this freedom of movement claim that the ECOWAS region has a better freedom of movement than East Africa and SADC. I want to know what they are talking about in a sense. First, in terms of infrastructure linkages, the ECOWAS region is the worst of the different parts of the continent. You try driving from Accra to Burkina Faso. At the end of it, you will have several bones broken. You try doing that through Western region to connect to Ivory Coast. You try the one that goes through Sunyani into Ivory Coast. And there are even no road connectivity. If you look at our road networks, many of our road networks do not end up at the borders of our neighbors. It's a terrible situation. And you also take a look at those who try to come by road from different nationalities, what our police and immigration people do to them. Many of us have traveled different parts. So I think it's good, the protocol, But just like Yah was talking about the differences between aspirations and the actual implementation protocol, how it's implemented, we need to take a closer look. But I also wanted to make the point that, you see, on your question about the 3 or 4 Francophone countries that are rebelling, I mean, why are they rebelling? ECOWAS reacted to the coups in a very bad way. And ECOWAS did not factor in these countries' experience of continuous French colonization. And ECOWAS was partly acting in the interest of France in the way they reacted to those 3 countries, not just democracy. They are continued to be colonized. It's great to see them wanting to move out of the French franc. It's great to see them renegotiate some of the mineral contracts. They have a lot of lessons for ECOWAS and for the rest of us.
It's coming. Let's press it. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are a number of questions. To pick off from the mining thing, there are a couple of things. The question about what's happening in ASM, artisanal and small-scale mining, issues of legality, and so on. I mean, Charles's answer partly addresses some of those. I mean, there are different issues and different levels. First, legality. Who has permission to mine? Who has permission to mine? Okay. Then so that gives you the status of somebody who can mine. Then there are the regulatory standards which govern your operation. Okay. And I think Charles's point about the role of the state is very important. Because, Emmanuel, the issues that you raise about, say, the work culture inside enterprises, that can be asked of a whole range of shops. People, women who sell in the market where tolls are being collected, where there are no toilet facilities. The women have bowls under their chair where they are pissing. And they will be handing your tomatoes the next minute and so on. So the regulatory issue that you raise in ASM, it's important. So the question about standards that are enforced in an enterprise which is allowed to operate is another level of issues. And then there is the issue, so the role of the state takes a number of issues. There's a connected issue also about how the focus on ASM, the focus on illegal, artisanal, small-scale mining, and its pollution. It's an important issue. But the discussion has been undifferentiated. Undifferentiated in terms of how do people end up selling garbage in the streets of Accra? The brother from Klosag, you're thinking about what's happening in the village. The economic rationality that is driving those young people to leave the village, to come and sell in the streets of Accra, is the same economic rationality that is driving some of them to dig in pits, which collapse on them. We need to recognize that. The point he made about the millions of people who are going hungry. If you yesterday had a farm and suddenly loads of square kilometers of that land is given to a concession, you cannot enter it. Protected by the military, which is supported with your taxes. There was a time the military had an agreement. When the thing was withdrawn I think at some point, the president of the Chamber of Mines pleaded that given the importance of the large-scale mines in generating, you know what, forex, foreign exchange, the soldiers should come back and protect. I mean, are the mines at war with Ghanaians? That the guns of the Ghana military should be trained in support? I mean, symbolically, these are enclaves of foreign capital with a lot of freedom to export their earnings. When the Bank of Ghana was doing its so-called gold for oil, because of the agreements that it had with the large-scale foreign mines, it basically expropriated the products of the small-scale people to support that gold mine. Because if they went a particular way with the large-scale mines, they will be sued. You know, regulatory takings is a form of expropriation, and therefore arbitration, judgment debt. So in discriminating in favor of the large-scale mines, actually, there's a knock-on effect of discriminating against domestic producers. Meantime, the regulatory architecture in mining is primarily geared to servicing the large-scale foreign mines. Even the legal small-scale miners, in terms of regulatory support, they get crumbs. I mean, you read a lot of papers written about the entry requirements, first of all, into small-scale mining, how that is feeding, the difficulty, and how that is feeding illegal mining. The abuse of the law, where licenses have been processed, they are sitting on the minister's desk. He disregards the statutory requirements and signs them when he likes. And there are claims of selective politically influenced decision-making about who gets licenses and so on. So when we are talking about legality and standards, there's a mix of factors. But the absence of economic opportunities is a key driver for many young people who are going into legal mining. But the people who are making a killing from illegal mining and also destructive mining by being given licenses in forest reserves are people who are politically connected. The Chinese have become the object of our xenophobia. Who is facilitating the presence of the Chinese? At the height of the anti-Galamsey thing in 2018, thereabouts, we had a round table where we invited one of the commanders of Operation Vanguard. And he told us, first of all, he apologized for the damages they done to people's equipment, human rights violations, and so on. But said they too learned a lot in the field. One thing they learned was that no number of troops was going to end illegal mining because the most important operators have political protection and they are connected. So, but in the conflation of the livelihood drivers facing ordinary people with the criminal gangs who are the Ghanaian equivalent of the drug lords in Latin America with armed protection, how to respond to the challenge becomes impossible, because what you need to do to deal with those who are looking for livelihoods is different from what you need to do to deal with the criminal bosses, basically. The criminal boss issue, if you cut the head of that lot, you will see a knock-on effect in terms of the capacity of the state. So it's important to have these elements of differentiation. And the thing also about the drive for forex, it's because the kind of mining which is potentially developmental, it's around things like minerals with utility. So salt is a mineral with multiple utility in food, in the chemical industry, in industrial processes. The humble clay will give you houses, will give you ceramics. Gold is hoarded by rich people, either in bars or in jewelry. 83, but only a minute level of gold actually is utilized. So gold basically is a store of value or it's a vanity product. But this negative impact in terms of the amount of earth which has to be dug up for 1 ounce of gold, the amount of water which is needed to wash it. It's all masked by this narrative about, forex. Because if we had linkages, useful minerals being developed in Ghana and the region, and some of the points Charles made, this thing about gold will be less important. But there's a geological reality. 20% of Ghana's land mass is potentially gold bearing. So a rigorous approach to managing alternative land use, protecting areas against all kinds of mining, becomes a key part of the state's responsibility. As it is now, anywhere gold is found, particularly of interest to large-scale foreign capital, the Ghanaian state will be marching in front of it to make it possible. Areas where local small-scale miners have been operating, they've been driven out and handed over to large-scale miners. The mines which have opened, in the Upper East region are examples where people actually were licensed small-scale miners. They were driven out and given to large-scale, And there are also instances where, in the recent Newmont development, under the law, people have to negotiate with the communities. But because of people's negative experiences and the absence of state support, a group of people refused to move. In an unprecedented act, the Ghana government has nationalized the land and handed it over to Newmont. That's the extent of commitment to large-scale foreign capital. And you have to ask, whose gold is it? So this nominal public owner, we need to reclaim. So when I talk about accountability, it's coming from that reclaiming as citizens of the ownership, which to influence also the choices that are made in mining. When the Ejapa, kind of, as it were, Ejapa scheme failed, the Ejapa maneuver failed, the Mineral Income Investment Fund is now holding the mineral income, the dividends and the royalty income from gold. Go on their website and see how much information you can get about how the billions they are sitting on is being used. There's no information. None. Occasionally, some blurb is put out about how some investment decision is taken. On the side, they said 75% of their investments are in shares. There's no information about which companies they are investing in. So there's a whole scandal around the mineral mining regime that should be of interest to us. So the legality issue, but the responsibility of the state for managing public resources in a way which creates opportunities for Ghanaians, protects Ghanaians against environmental impacts, and also utilizes the mineral resources as well as the revenue stream for transformation, are a complex of issues that we should take together. As for the outreach in the communities beyond Accra, it's an important point. We do not work on all issues. We work in partnership with other organizations. And on the basis of that partnership, we all contribute what we can. CLOSAG, as a national trade union organization, will be quite ready to work with you to reach the workers' movement. Because the workers' movement has always been a very important part of the constituency that Third World Network Africa works with. Because mass membership organizations are important for reaching the wider society. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do another round. So we'll start with you, and then we'll come there.
My name is Matthew Akrakinche from Adam. Talk about a company that the livelihood of people. But as a youth coming, I believe in development. And that is the key of every community that will develop. Growing up, this Temahabo, like it will be in Adan, but some few people also rise against that, and the company is here. Bato Hospital, it will be in Sege, but because of some few people, I will not agree. The hospital is gone. There is an investor that is called Soti. He came to mine the salt. He acquired the land. There is issue. The man is gone. Dojido also came. There is issue. The man is gone. So before this investor will come, Apiti came in 19th of May 1985. There is issue again. 1985. They shot Magin dead. And the investor is gone. And there is nothing happening. As being an agent of Adan and youth of Adan, like by this time, if the Temahabo is in Adan, I will not be in Tema struggling. I will be in Adan. So all that I'm talking about is that what he said, the lagoon is the investor that pump water into it. The lagoon, that time that the investor comes, the lagoon is not working. When you go there and you look at the way the investor developed the place now, is different from the previous time. Now, the investor have done community pans. After that, there is investor again have brought out grower scheme. That scheme, if you organize yourself like 50 people, you come, they will give you the land and they will use it to pass through the due procedures so that you do the sort by yourself. As we are speaking now, they are doing a chianco that I normally call it a salt galamsey, using black rubbers, and they will put it inside this thing and do the salt. And even it's not good for consumption. What I'm talking about is that as a youth, I'm talking about development. As a youth, I'm talking about the future of my children, my unborn children, that Adan should develop. As we are talking about now, as we are speaking now, over 1,000 people, ladies, women, got interest-free loan. That we never see that before. As we are speaking now, there is a sports village that we don't see that in Adan for so many years. As we are speaking now, my hometown, I'm from Aklabanya. Anytime that there is rainfall, there is flooding, to let the place become an issue. This company came and helped, I'm from Aklabanya, came and helped us with machines and their own diesels and dig the district for that. Today, if the rainfall, we are free. So what I'm talking about is that what my boss is talking about. We should use this platform to engage the people, to see development as key. We should use this platform to let them understand that it should not be about few people, but it should be about the interest and the development of the people of Adan. It's not all of us that we do sort. Some do fishing, some do farming, but we have to look at the interest of the community. We have to look at the vision of the investor. So it's not like, as we are speaking now, the communities around the Songo Lagoon, it costs the investor over billions of dollars to pump water there. They are fishing on it. Nobody sack anybody. And they are there working. But because of one or two people, so we need more education that we will use this platform to educate them to see development as a key. Youth, some guy from my hometown, as we speak now, he's a footballer. He's in Europe now playing ball. Those are the things that we need. Those are what we are looking for. Those is the things that we want to get in Adan. So I want to pray and use this platform that we should look at development as a key. And we should leave the investors that thing that anytime there's investor, they are bringing solar company in Adan, land issue. The company is gone. How many people will work? Solar system company is coming to Adan, land issue. This is my land. This family say this is my land. And the company is gone. Like youth will get work to do. So it is time that we should change, we should educate so that we should change our attitude, like what my daddy is saying, so that the population of poverty in Adan will come down. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Sam Dancy, and I work for ISODEC. I just want to ask Yao, because you keep on actually using the state and government interchangeably. Do we actually have a nation state in Ghana? State and government. I think it's good for us to actually unpack it and understand that currently we don't have a state. It's government. And we should label it as such when we are doing the analysis. Otherwise, we keep on talking about states and government interchangeably when the actual fact,
the problems actually the government of the day at any point in time in dealing with the issues. If we label them that way, helps a lot. Charles talked about dependencies and he talked about food as one of the key dependencies that we're actually depending as a country. I also think that it actually goes beyond the current food and food systems that we actually have. I mean, if you look at the planting for food and jobs, for instance, Yao talked about a fertilizer company that was actually one of the key kingpins. We all know what fertilizers can do to the land in terms of soil fertility and biodiversity. These transnational corporations actually kill our soils and our lands, and to a very large extent, it actually compromise our ability to actually grow food for ourselves on a sustainable basis, and not just food that we need. And I think maybe going forward, I don't know what TWN actually is thinking about as far as issues around food and food systems is concerned, going forward within Ghana and the rest of Africa, because I think it's actually something that we have to start thinking about. Otherwise, within the next 4, 5 to 10 decades, our soils to a very large extent will be very, very badly damaged, and we can't actually regenerate the soils again. Currently, we're actually depending on them. If you buy maize to actually plant, you can actually plant that maize and then harvest it, but you can't take the generation of that maize to replant again. It has implications. And I think there's a need for us to actually look at that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Samuel Akom, and I would want to find out, most often governments will be suggesting great ideas, great policies, but it looks like always the implementation is a problem. How do we reorient the minds of government so that after they lay out all of these plans and all, they will be able to implement it? Because, for example, talking about food importation and we being able to produce our own food, let's ask a critical question. With the planting for food and jobs, how many senior high schools have been involved in the planting for food and jobs? If they were involved, I think it could have solved the problem of school feeding if they were involved. And so I think it is about time we also look at how governments can reorient their minds, can have broader stakeholder engagement to ensure that when it comes to the implementation of the great plans they have, it will be a smooth one. We are about having an election. Whoever wins the election, they will start to implement their policies. In terms of the implementation, what do they have to do? Who do they have to consult to ensure that the plans they have are actually actualized? So my question to the panel is for us to find a way for government to be able to critically implement the policies, because I think we really have a problem with policy implementation in the country. Thank you.
We'll go here to the right. Woman. Oh, okay, you are raising for you.
Thank you very much. I wish to thank TWN Africa for the opportunity given us to come here today. Firstly, we thank them for the insight they've given us concerning mining and the salt business over there in Adan. My brother Kinche has talked about Adan Songo Lagoon and its salt production. He talked about development, and Songo salt is something special for the Adans. Adans are in the salt business before the company he's talking about came to Adan. And salt producing is our livelihood, our everything. So why should an investor come and then everything should be taken away from the indigenes and be given to the investor? Such business is such that salt is a renewable resource. If you produce salt, or you get a place like this room, and you produce salt today, you are going to be using the land forever. It's not like gold that you extract the gold, and then it will finish. It can't be used over there again. I am a chief, and I have a community. Salt work is what my community people do. Is it fair for an investor to come so that what I've been doing for my livelihood should be taken away from me, that it should be presented or it should be given to an investor to do so that we, the indigenes, will believe nothing? So, I wish to thank TWN for enlightening us. When this project came, they are the people who bring out their business plan for us to know whatever is happening over there. If not because of them, we are doomed. We thank them. So, what I want to say, what the project my brother is talking about, ceding a whole land, 41,000 acres of land to one person, leaving all the indigenes just like that. I may say he doesn't know what he's saying. And such investor will come and then be killing people, beating, brutalizing people, and you say, in the name of this development, and you say we the Adans should accept that. Thank you.
Last on this round to our sister at the back there. After the responses, we'll do another round. So please relax.
Thank you very much. My name is Selina Sinousu. I work with UNFPA, and I would like to say I equal to TWN for the 30 years. Barbara. Okay, so I would like to pick up from the issue of the National Development Agenda. I don't know where to start, but from where I sit, I think that it is because we don't have an agenda as a country. The UN, for instance, we support government with what they do for the country. But most of the time, you see that even within the same party or the same government, if there are changes in ministers, everything that you would have done within a period just gets pushed to the background, and then a new minister will come and start. And this is duplication, resources are inelastic. And I think it is because we are not having a plan as a country which we want our people to follow. So can we, as civil society, maybe TWN leading us as a coalition, come up with an agenda? Because I think that government will always do what they will do until the people mobilize to say, this is the way we want to go. So can we have like a coalition or something to deal with an agenda where, irrespective of who comes into power, you will be forced to follow that agenda for us to be able to develop as a country? Because for now, I think sometimes when you sit back and you look at it, we are wasting too much resources. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to our panel.
Can you hear me? Okay. The Adan debate, I think it's good that there is a representative or a sympathizer of electoral camp in the room. And it's possible for us to have a civil conversation. Because, okay, but there are people here who are disapprove of the thing. It's not a problem. It's fine. You talk about development, which is an important point. I was making a lighter point because when Adan chiefs who support electrochem have spoken about TWN, some terrible things have been said. Like, yeah, Graham, he should go and deal with Keta Salt because that's where his people are from. He shouldn't come to Adan. But you see, on a more serious note, this debate points to something. I think there is differences in how we understand development. Now, and also the importance of information. Because we, TWN Network Africa, in supporting the Adan people in their opposition to electrochem, and we ourselves independently opposing electrochem, our starting point actually is not electrochem. It's not electrochem. It goes back to the point I made earlier about the responsibility of the state. And to Sam Dance's case, in this case, narrowly, the responsibility of government will come to the state, in a minute. And I think knowledge is important. You are entirely right about how Adan people have missed opportunities for development. There's a lot of poverty in Adan. And it is entirely understandable that after so many years of government failure and neglect to lead the development of the potential of Adan Songo, not only as a salt-producing lagoon, but that whole area is development possibilities. When things get really desperate and people are suffering, when the government hands over the project to one of his cronies, who comes in and is now dispensing charity, of course, when people will be grateful that they are getting something. So that's understandable. So it is important to step back from the seeming charity and development leadership of electrochem back to the beginning. Why did TWN Africa oppose and continue to oppose the electrochem scheme? The granting of those leases to electrochem is an example of lawlessness and abuse of power in a way which also diverts attention to the fact that there's a laid down plan formulated by previous governments, which was responding to the cycle of violence and confrontation that the first Adan speaker spoke about. To end that cycle of violence, the government had the master plan developed and passed PNDC Law 287, so as for the Adan Songo lagoon, not only to be developed as a salt-producing lagoon, but that whole area to become a development hub based around salt. Successive governments, not only successive governments, so therefore the political class failed Adan people by not implementing that plan. Because at different times, different people were jockeying to see which of their cronies will get their hands on the prize that is Adan Songo. So, having failed successively, now the Akufo-Addo government is giving the impression that it cares about the Adan people and is making up for the failure of successive governments to develop the lagoon. The plan, the master plan, would have allowed salt production not only by electrochem, but by other large-scale salt producers, side by side with the local people. Because that lagoon is big enough for the local communities to be producing their ASM salt and for several large-scale producers to... Have you seen the master plan? Yes. And is what Electrochem doing superior to the master plan? But let me finish my point. The difference between the master plan and the charity of Electrochem that we are praising is that under the master plan, people's right, and I use the word right, the right to produce salt is guaranteed and protected by the state. It is not an act of charity within the corporate social responsibility plan of Electrochem. It's a right that the state grants and protects. And in doing, and also implementing the master plan, the government would help the small-scale people also to increase their productivity. So the problems about quality and so on that you're talking about would also have been dealt with as part of a comprehensive plan. And critically, that all-inclusive plan would not have needed 24-hour presence of state security to allow the company to operate. Because the coexistence of large-scale and small-scale within the master plan would have been harmonious, and all of them would have benefited also from the presence of a processor or a refiner as a hub within which they are all operating. So when the government fails to implement an all-inclusive plan and hands over the lagoon to a company whose original business plan was explicit in saying that down people will be taught to do something else rather than produce salt. Actually, what appears to be an act of charity is Electrochem making concessions in the face of the resistance of our down people. Let's be clear about this. The plan that was submitted and callously approved by the Minerals Commission was for the expulsion of our down people. And this goes to my point also about the seeming belief in large scale. All over the gold-producing areas, schemes that could have included people were not developed. People were expelled. To the extent that in the Newmont thing, even when people resisted, the government nationalized the land and handed it over to Newmont. So what you are describing as the great sympathetic act of inclusion by Electrochem, which side by side is coexisting with the brutalization of people. It's a travesty, because it's the resistance which has forced Electrochem to at least modify the original plan to expel everybody from the lagoon. Have you read the business plan? Did he say it will expel the people? You haven't read it. I'll send you a copy to read. I'll give you, the copy which we bought from the Minerals Commission. So Electrochem has given ground to the people. It's given ground because people have resisted. The deaths that have occurred, the alienation, the delegitimation, the divisions in Adan, which have been triggered by this Electrochem project, would not have occurred if the Akufo-Addo government was not engaged in an illegal act of cronyism, but had implemented a vision of development as embodied in the master plan. And actually, the master plan could become a template for how we see mineral development in this country. So rather than defend the logic of illegality and cronyism, which is giving crumbs to our down people, we should be demanding that the all-inclusive model, which does not require a lord to throw crumbs to people like chicken eating corn. That's what we need in Adan, and that's what we need in mineral development in this country.
You want to add? Charles and okay.
Okay,
so
couldn't do it better.
Hold on, there are others who want to. You can pick up your issues after, but there are others who haven't taken the floor. We'll do a last round. So one, yeah. Stand low.
A very good morning to all of us. This afternoon. Thank you so very much. My name is Bernard Colley, and I speak for Electrochem Ghana Limited. Let me use this wonderful opportunity to say thank you to Dr. Graham and the TWN Network for giving us this wonderful platform. Before I advance, I would also like to say that one of our own, who happens to be a chief at Tuflo, who made a statement which I think he needs to, as it is, withdraw and apologize, if not on this platform. As a chief, I think to say that the investor is killing people in Ada, I don't think this is a statement that we need to encourage, more particularly having the opportunity to be on this wonderful platform. Maybe there should be a better way, but to say the investor is killing people in Ada, I think is not something advised. It's not true, let me put it that way. Fast forwarding. Our brother made some wonderful submission with regards to what Electric Ghana Limited is currently doing in Ada ever since we took over legitimately according to the laws of the Republic of Ghana. And I wouldn't like to say much because we don't have enough time, else I'll delve deep into it to let people know what we are doing currently and how other people are benefiting and what is done to benefit in the future. Let me read from there and then touch on what our able Dr. Graham said with regards to our initial business plan. It's a surprise for me, hearing for the first time, that our policy includes the expulsion of other people from or within the concession. This is a story. This is a history for me. I've never heard this anywhere. I've never chanced on any document whatsoever that states that.
From the access to the lagoon.
Well, that is exactly what I'm saying respectfully.
Okay,
Doc, we have a state institution that regulates mining. The same state institution that gives right for companies to mine. These institutions have laws that governs operations of mining companies. And so if that is the case, it will be suicidal for the state to accept a company with such business plan. Talk less of giving that state, that company, the right to operate. Fast forwarding. In your earlier statement, you made us understand that part of the reason or the work that TWN has been doing over the years now, that one major thing has to do with the protection of the communities against pollution, etc., etc. And it made us understand that they work in collaboration with other organizations. I have had the document, I've chanced on the document, and I've realized that over the years, they did a lot in terms of advocacy, making sure that artisanal miners will learn and know how to mine responsibly. And so their advocacy and efforts prior to Electrochem coming is open. It's there. It's a testimony. Everybody can attest to it. The issue is, prior to Electrochem coming, what was the state of the lagoon? It will interest most people here that the lagoon, the pride of Ada, was gone. And it's a fact. Something our able doctor and his team saw from morning and they fought against. There was a practice that was happening prior to Electrochem coming that rendered the God-given natural resource dead. And that act was the illegal mining on the face of the lagoon, which they locally term it Achiago. This was an act that rendered Adasongo dead. When Electrochem took over, unfortunately, people were mining on the bed of the lagoon. And this is what they do. They trap rainwater and borehole to generate salt. Like our brother Riley said, they go further by applying this black rubber stuff, which makes it more even worse. Because at the end of the day, is it internationally accepted practice so far as salt production is concerned? Because the answer is no. So over the period, this is what has been happening at Ada. We all know we had a lagoon, but the lagoon was no more. Now, Electrochem coming, there was a serious, a very well-calculated attempt by the company to restore back Ada Songo Lagoon to its normalcy. The company spent millions of dollars to deseal the then deserted Ada Songo Lagoon. A lagoon that is filled with silt. There are pictorial evidence to that effect. If we get opportunity from TWN Network, we will invite stakeholders for a forum like this for us to do presentation, for people to see it and attest to the fact. Millions of dollars were used to revamp or to restore the lagoon. Again, the company purchased jumbo pump machine worth $70 million US to pump seawater into the Songo. Because before, sea water flows by gravity into the Songo. And by our actions, the silt has risen to a level that the seawater cannot pass through the Lolo into the Songo again by gravity. So you need a mechanical form of, to power the salt water, the brine, to come into the Ada Songo, for it to become Songo. Today, as we speak, respectfully, what Dr. Graham and co. fought for, what they were advocating with the Hikachem and the women of valor, what they were advocating with the help of the community radio, Ada Radio and co. Today, at least for anything at all, by coming of Electrochem Limited, the Ada Songo has been restored. This is priceless. To me, we can boast, at least for anything at all, by the coming of Electrochem Limited, the pride of the Ada people has been restored. Hitherto, and Ada is not all of us that do mining. People, thank you very much. People also, there are other people who engage in other activities like fishing and the rest. Today, as we speak, there's life for fisher folks. People now employ their trade because the lagoon is back to normalcy. It has given opportunity for other people to also work, apart from salt mining. That is what it is at the moment. Respectfully, has there been any place in Ghana, so far as mining is concerned, that we don't have pockets of issues?
Please wind up.
There has been several issues relating to disagreement in left, right, center. So the situation in Ada is not different from other places. But the difference is probably the dynamics and how we handle the situation. Yes, like you rightly said, there has been a series of approach by companies before Electrochem. They never succeeded because that dynamic doesn't pave way or doesn't agree. But the issues, Prof. Doc and our able speaker mentioned, or they said earlier on, the forex factor is the reason why all our natural resources are under pressure. Okay, what are we doing to support local champions to ensure that those who are mining, indigenous miners, can be given that cushioning, that support assistance? Because at the end of the day, these are our own. In this case, Electrochem Ghana Limited is 100% owned by one of our own. And so, what can we do in the face of this situation to better and make sure that the relationship between artisanal miners, the people of Ada and Electrochem can be harmonized in such a way that everybody will understand that Electrochem coming to Ada is rather a blessing, but not a curse. Finally, before I go respectfully, with all the of respect, I wish you also state, as Doc Riley said, our focus, Electrochem is not in Ada throwing freebies. It's understatement. Respectfully. As we speak currently, we have not extended our commercial operations outside the old Songo salt area, which is vacuum. We have not done that. Anytime you hear of electrochem having issues in the community, what have you, it has to do with creation of evaporators. It has to do with construction of community ponds for the communities.
Okay,
it has
sir.
to do with taking of topographical works
Very generous.
to see where and how.
Please, I think you've
But it is not about. Very well.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much
Yeah,
once
thank
again
you.
for giving us this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you.
I believe we'll have the time for us to delve further into the issue. Thank you.
Now we've run out of time, so we'll take just two more.
Okay, so thank you so much. My name is Faustina Obeng Adoma. I'm an independent researcher, and I think I'm speaking because I'm passionate about the Adan issue, having researched it in the last 4 to 5 years. So one, I want to respond to the Achiapo issue and then throw my question to the panel. I think indeed the lagoon was not in a very good state as a result of Achiapo. But if you trace the history well, Achiapo in itself was also a response to people being dispossessed by large-scale capitalist production. And so the people not knowing the right way to balkanize portions of the lagoon resorted to whatever means they had to also balkanize portions because they had experienced dispossession from the vacuum or Apenten situation, which resulted in the shooting of Maggie. So to also state that indeed you met it that way because there was a prior incident of capital taking over the lagoon that had resulted in the people taking over the balkanization in a Achiapo system. So just to set that record quite straight. And now to my question, as he indicated, indeed, if you paid attention to some of the processes that go on in the granting of these mining licenses, you would see that they are legal. And that takes me to some research that I have done in the way the legal regime or the policy regime in this country has been framed. I think in the immediate post-independent era, there was a real developmental state. And so there was effort to put in place policies that would nationalize resources as a way to foster a certain national development agenda. But over the years, we have come to see that the countries or the governments, successive governments in developing countries have sort of been co-opted by the push from capital. And so many of these governments are responding to capital much more than they are responding to the needs of their countries. And because there are a lot of legal or policies that had been passed, granting certain sort of resources in the hands of government, not to own it fundamentally in the policies of nationalization were not trusting ownership per se in the hands of government, but sort of custodianship. But in a certain, custodianship has been loosely defined, and so the governments have come to be seen as people who have a very big control over these resources. And because of that, you see that even in situations where a resource is not traditionally a mineral, like the case of salt, the moment capital becomes interested in that resource and it is reclassified as a mineral, then there is some law that allows the government to either nationalize that resource. And because the government sort of responds more to capital, then they easily grant those minerals in the form of leases to capital. Right now, I know that if capital becomes interested in sand, our governments will classify sand as a mineral, and they will grant leases to big capitalist operations to mine sand in this country. So there's also a certain legal regime that makes it easy for governments to grant these leases in a legal way. And so if you want to challenge it legally, you would see that there has not been any flout of the law. And which brings me to the question of really building a critical mass of people that really understand these things, and so that governments can be accountable to their people and not accountable to capital. But as it stands currently, it seems our government's response more to capital, and there's no political will. The political will probably be when governments see that there's a critical mass of people that would hold them accountable at the polls when they do not follow certain routes or they do not follow certain dimensions that would bring about an inclusive development. But as it stands currently, I don't think as a country we have that critical mass of people. And so TWN, and I know there are a host of other civil society organizations in this room, maybe collectively, how do we really build that critical mass of people that can hold our governments accountable to us and not to capital?
Thank you. There.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I respond to Nene Adebom Anim II, Chief of Salom Adan, and then a Vice Chairman of Adan Songo Lagoon Association. I thought we are here to come and celebrate the success that TNW have chalked over the 30 years. But to my dismay, my brother from Aklabanya is here to preach about, in quote, the good deeds of Electrochem, of which some of us are victims of that good that you are talking about. If my brother should mention about killing and you are saying he should retract, I am here standing by that word that he's not going to retract it today, nor tomorrow. Because as I stand here, and as he stands here, and as the three of us are here, we happen to be victims, just that we are alive today. We have some of our compatriots who are in the soil today because of the coming of Electrochem. We understand what is called development, and we know what is development. And we will welcome a development devoid of any brutalities and anything that will take away our livelihood and will cause us to go into the soil. So, I will appeal to my brother Bernard Colley. He shouldn't forget that the last day he met Noah Dame in court, he pointed it to him point blank that he should apologize to the executive director or whosoever, being McDowell or whosoever, before he could leave the next 24 hours. And Noah, after Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Noah is in the soil today, plus some others. We have the evidence. We are not here for...
Please.
Hello, Akla Kiche, you better keep quiet. If you know your father is the chief of Aklaba, I'm in the same capacity of your father. Please. You better keep quiet when I'm talking. You better keep quiet. You should learn how to observe protocol.
Excuse me. Hello, please sit down. Hello.
The chairman is speaking.
If you can, please. We don't want an exchange just between two people here. We are here to celebrate TWN and their work. Views have been expressed. If you have a view, just quickly wind up on it. And already we are out of time. So if you can.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, I have one or two questions to ask Dr. Graham.
So please ask that directly.
When he was talking, he made mention of accountability. I want to know whether that accountability, whether it's on the part of the government or on the part of the owners of the resource, or where does that accountability falls? And then in terms of royalties or compensation or whatever, now again, he made mention of some laws regarding the extractions of minerals in Ghana. I want to know whether those laws are really enforceable. If really they are enforceable, then it means that the government must at least work strictly according to those rules and regulations. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, but we don't have any more time. We've already run out of our time, so I'd like the panel now to give some responses. I think there are
quick
a few
one.
questions.
The Adan thing is not going to be settled here, but at bottom, really, is a question too of different visions of development and inclusion. The Electrochem vision of development thinks that, a big man can be kind to poor people and they should be grateful. TWN believes that mineral resources should be exploited in an equitable way where, as much as possible, citizens who can get their direct livelihood from the resource get it, as was embodied in the master plan. The fact that Electrochem is a beneficiary of the government's decision to disregard PNDC Law 287 and the master plan. Of course, having got hold of the resource, they will do their best to legitimize it. And the government institutions will insist that they have acted legally. But we are not, but even here, the legality of the grant of those leases are questionable. But more fundamentally, there was a more equitable and transformative agenda which had been adopted by previous governments, which the Akufo-Addo government and its predecessors decided not to implement. The point made by Fosti about previous dispossession and its consequences, it's important. So we in TWN, we continue to believe that the vision embodied in the master plan, as also represented by the project in PNDC Law 287, actually it's a model and a potential template. And precisely the act of the Akufo-Addo government in disregarding it is a kind of the use of government power which should be resisted. So that the beneficiary of that act would defend it, understandably. And it is not, it's the fact that people are benefiting from that act. You know, years ago, when an MP who was detained, who was jailed in America for drug offenses, came back, there was an army of people at Kotoka sprinkling powder on him because he was paying fees in the village. So generosity can come in a context of legality. It can come in the context of abuse of power. But there's hardly any situation where a company is operating that there will not be some consequences. And in fact, the discussion that we have always fronted about mining is precisely the point Fosti made, that the development model that is prevailing in this country, the point I made earlier, that public ownership has been gutted of its meaning of benefit to the citizens. Electrochem's acquisition of Ada, it's a gross example, not only because of the general regime, but because there's a specific regime that had been put down for that place. And the prosperity and national development benefits that was envisaged in that project would not be incidental to what choice a private company makes, but it was actually a national plan. As it is now, what happens in Ada is in the largesse and kindness of one person who is the beneficiary of the abuse of power. By all means, community plans were made, but the foundations of that largesse is cronyism, abuse of power, and illegality, founded in a disregard for equity.
Thank you. Bruce.
Positions that have been taken on this particular aspect of the work of TWN really justifies the importance of having an organization as TWN Africa, because I think we are not monolithic. We all don't think the same. We all don't think that poor people matter. I mean, there are people who live their lives making sure that poor people remain poor. And there are people who believe that we are all born equal, and therefore the principles set up by the UN and other systems that try to promote inclusivity, equity principles, and all of that are relevant. And I think that it is in this sense that we must uphold the importance of having an organization like TWN Africa, having existed for 30 years. And as Charles was speaking, he emphasized that we are expecting TWN Africa to live on for the next 30 years and beyond. The importance of the work that TWN does. I think research is fundamental, policy advocacy, building constituencies around issues and so on are very critical. And I was quite excited about the information given by the young woman who has been working on issues of the salt industry for some time now. I think this is the kind of evidence that we need to show what actually happens within specific periods of time about the extractive sector, mining, and what have you. And indeed, were we to even have a bit more time, she could have shown the ways in which these kinds of experiences on the ground in terms of the community impacts affect women, men, children differently. And I think that it is in this wise also that we want to uphold the work that TWN has done in addressing issues of gender relations in all areas of its work over the period. I think the issue of accountability has also come up very, very strongly. And we are thinking that accountability is actually mutual. It's not something that is just the responsibility of the state, government, and citizens. All of us have accountability responsibilities. But then the state becomes meaningful when a committed government that believes in the rights of citizens upholds its responsibility. Because we all go to the polls and we vote. And very soon we are going to vote. And the kinds of people that we vote into power will define how our trajectory is going to be in the next 4 years or more. And so when we are voting people to power, we have to be very discerning. And that's how information, particularly this kind of alternative information that stresses on the people's rights and also on transformation and equity principles, must really be studied very well so that organizations like TWN Africa can exist beyond our time on earth to benefit generations to come. Thank you very much.
Yes. You have a final word for us? Yeah.
I think this small ADA debate basically explains the important work that TWN has done. This is the Ghana debate. If you take it into the international arena, we have the same levels of tensions of debate. So congratulations to TWN on this. One more quick thing before is to make the point that we are, as a country, running into a serious crisis. And that crisis is partly this. Having failed over the years to transform our economy where the elite steal from value that is added, what is left to be grabbed are natural resources. Is land, wealth. That's what the grabbing is. And this small elite utilize government, so finance government that takes over the state. And that means all the instruments of states as a means of capturing the only wealth that we have left, which is natural resource wealth. And if we don't sit up, and we will wake up in a decade's time to kill ourselves for survival. And we should resist the temptation to sell foreign exchange and investment as the fundamental value that a country should pursue rather than the quality of life of people. So thanks very much once again to Third World Network Africa.
Please join me again in saying a very, very big thank you to our panelists. We've been sitting down for so long that I dare not try a summary. And in fact, I think in the closing remarks, the summary came out quite clearly. But I would just like us to go away with a few things, keep a few things in mind. One, about dependence and the fact that dependence will not do. We cannot continue to be dependent. And if you have a situation in which the most basic thing you need, like food, you have to depend, on others, then you know that you really have a problem. But if we are going to avoid being dependent, then the questions of self-organization come up. Self-organization, which we know from the presentations today, Third World Network has helped some communities to engage in, but clearly, since the issues are still very present for us and go beyond Adan and Keta and also some of the northern communities which Third World Network has been engaged with, and also even the Western region, it means that self-organization is something that we must bear in mind very strongly. Linked up with that self-organization is a question of knowledge, a lot of which Third World Network has generated. But an important point came out during the discussion about how to popularize this knowledge. Today we know that so-called social media is one of the most important ways in which knowledge is popularized. It's not everybody who can sit down and cram things into their head. But these days you can see everybody is looking and laughing at stuff. So we have to be thinking the ways in which we can popularize this knowledge and bring information to our people. Because in doing that, we can also help our people to understand the value of organizing. And the two other things, organizing with all the knowledge and information, is also the question of partnerships, which I think, again, TWN has shown a lot of leadership in building partnerships with a range of organizations in civil society. And when necessary, it has even reached out to governments and intergovernmental organizations, not only in Ghana, but across Africa. So as we self-organize, we must also know that we need partnerships to be able to move forward and to develop the way we do. My final takeaway for all of us, I think, is the question of accountability, which a number of people have talked about already. And as Rose just simply pointed out, accountability is not just one way. Of course, those that we invest with authority, we certainly must demand accountability from them. But to be able to do that, it also means that we must organize, and we must know what we want, and we must know what we demand from them. So thank you very much for staying these 3 hours. In fact, it's even more than 3 hours now, and I saw very little movement. So thank you very much for paying so much attention to the discussions and helping TWN to celebrate, to launch its celebration of 30 years of active service. Thank you, panel, and the session is closed. Yes, Pauline, announcement.
Is it on? Yes. I'd also like to say a very big thank you to our very able chair. Please put a hand together for him. Evidently, as you've seen, the discussions were not always easy, and they were very supercharged, but we thank you all for being here with us. And we would like to invite you all to join us for lunch. When you're leaving, a coupon will be given to you so that we can sit and exchange, not battle, over lunch and build our networks as we do. So a special thank you to all of you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next encounter. Thank you very, very much.